सेव किया था ना?
मैं सिर्फ इसलिए गया था क्योंकि उसने मुझे कॉल किया, that's it. But listen तो.
Save it for someone else.
जिंदगी में सेव करना जरूरी है, मगर जब बात पैसों की हो, सिर्फ सेविंग से काम नहीं चलेगा। इक्विटी म्यूचुअल फंड्स में इन्वेस्ट कीजिए और अपने सेविंग्स को आगे बढ़ने का मौका दीजिए।
Mutual fund investments are subject to market risks. Read all scheme-related documents carefully.
In this special edition of Global Print, I'm reporting from Kabul, Afghanistan. Now, I'm going to tell you a little bit, of course, about how Kabul has changed so completely. It's been a year since the Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan came to power. In fact, India and the Islamic Emirate share something which is quite interesting. They share the date of independence, 15th of August, because it was last year on this day, on the 15th of August 2021, that the Taliban rolled into Kabul. And as I'm very fond of saying, and I've said it before in some videos and in my writings from Kabul, the Taliban rolled in without firing a shot. So this year, 15th August 2022, as India celebrated 75 years of its independence, the Islamic Emirate celebrated 1 year of being in power in Afghanistan. But before I go any further, dear viewer, I'd like to make an appeal to you all the way from Kabul, which is please do subscribe and pay just a little bit for the Print's free, fair, objective and unhyphenated journalism. People like me are traveling across, not just across India, but also in regional countries like Afghanistan. So for stories like this, for videos like this, for the special coverage of issues, we would very much appreciate it if you could join in and help us, encourage us to do the kind of journalism that the Print has been known to do these last several years. Now back to this special edition of Global Print from Kabul, Afghanistan. And you may have noticed by now that I'm wearing a hijab. It's an abaya actually, which I bought not in Afghanistan but in Saudi Arabia. But increasingly here in Afghanistan, the traditional blue hijab is being replaced by this black hijab. And in fact, a lot of women also cover their faces with the niqab. And that is perhaps a manifestation of the growing Islamization of this country. Because otherwise, people are wearing a lot of color here. You see men and women. In fact, on the 15th of August, when Kabul celebrated its Day of Independence, or Jashn-e-Azadi as they say here, also words that are very familiar to us in India, not just in Kabul but of course elsewhere in Afghanistan. So on this day I went to this hill called the Wazir Akbar Khan Hill, and Wazir Akbar Khan, the area is very much in the heart of Kabul. It's in the heart of the diplomatic area. In fact, India's embassy is located in the Wazir Akbar Khan area. So I went to this hill which is close by, and on top of the hill is this sort of tall flagpole on which there used to be the flag of the Islamic Republic, which incidentally was gifted by India. And that has been taken. It was large flag. You see these very large flags in Delhi these days. You see them in Connaught Place, for example, and in other parts of the city. So similarly, there was this large flag of the Islamic Republic. It's the three colors, black, red, and green. Now that was pulled down when the Islamic Emirate came to power. The flag of the Islamic Emirate is also, as you know by now, a black and white flag. This flag has got the Shahada written on it, and the Shahada, as you probably know from the Quran Sharif, is a verse that people speak when you convert to Islam, or when you take on Islam as a faith, or sort of a devout Muslim would read the Shahada and hold the Shahada very close to her or to his heart. So on the Wazir Akbar Khan Hill, I drove up, and there it was so interesting because you saw this group of Afghan men. Actually, you don't see women that much in the Islamic Emirate. Women are more or less absent from the streets. You see women covered up, of course, completely in black. A lot of them also in the traditional blue-colored hijab. But here on the Wazir Akbar Khan Hill, the men were dancing the traditional Pashtun dances called the Atan. And it's really, really quite beautiful. And they were so joyful that when they were dancing, their steps. And I asked somebody, I said, isn't music banned under the Islamic Emirate? And he said, yes, the tabla is banned, the sarangi is banned, so basically musical instruments are banned, but singing is still not banned. So how can you ban music from the hearts of people? And I think the Taliban realized that. And that is why, unlike the first regime when they were in power from 1996 to 2001, this time around I think they've learned a lot of lessons. And you can read some of my reports from Kabul about this, whether the Taliban has changed, and if it has, how much it has changed. So this line that I keep hearing around in the city, and by the way, a lot of people here in Kabul speak Urdu, and guess where they've learnt their Urdu from? From the Hindi movies, from Bollywood. And Bollywood, I think, such an integral part of India's foreign policy, if it was only considered like that, and perhaps the Ministry of External Affairs should make it much more a part of its foreign policy, especially in the neighborhood. Now, on this hill, on this Wazir Akbar Khan hill, like I said, these men were dancing the Atan dance. And guess what? They were wearing all kinds of colors. Not just the black and white favored by the Taliban foot soldiers. They were wearing pink, red and yellow shirts. So traditionally, the Afghans are a very, very interesting people. They have tribes all over. There's very, very distinct tribes. Their cultures are very distinct. So this black and whiteification of Afghanistan, which is being superimposed by the Taliban. Now the question is, how far is it going to be successful in the days and months and years to come? Now, having said that, here is something else that I'd like to say, dear viewer, and that is something that surprised me so completely. I've been to Afghanistan many, many times in these last 20 years of the Republic. And in a sense, I was expecting the worst coming back this time, with Afghanistan being ruled by the Islamic Emirate. But what was fascinating to see was that the people that you stop on the streets, and a lot of them are the Taliban foot soldiers. And on the 15th of August, they were all celebrating at the Ahmed Shah Massoud Square. There were scores of them. And you speak to people, and they all say, when you say, they ask you where you're from, and you say you're from Hindustan. And that word, in a sense, everybody breaks into a smile, including the Taliban foot soldier. So what is this charm of India all about? The word India is like a talisman. So you wonder what this is about, especially, and then you go back and you think about how India and Afghanistan have been joined at the hip for the last 1,000 years. We think of words like the Mahmud of Ghaznavi or Muhammad Ghori. These are rulers of provinces like Ghazni and Ghori in southern Afghanistan. So Mahmud of Ghazni invaded India 17 times, looted the Somnath temple, and looted India, the treasuries of the kings and the rulers at the time. Similarly, the stories of Muhammad of Ghori and Prithviraj Chavan. Good, bad, ugly, indifferent. 1,000 years later, the Afghans only have love and affection for India. And that is something that is so interesting to see, especially in the Taliban foot soldiers. You would imagine that the Taliban, being supported by Pakistan for the last several decades, earlier the Mujahideen was being supported by the Pakistanis, now the Taliban in the last 20 years. And why would the Taliban then have this warm feelings for India? But that's the whole special relationship between these two countries, I would say. And that's why, in many ways, the Islamic Emirate wants India back. Now, India has reopened its mission. It's a very small mission right now. It's still called the technical mission. So there are a handful of diplomats, 3 or 4 or 5. I did not visit the mission, the Indian embassy this time, because for security reasons, they didn't want even journalists like me to come inside. Perhaps they were being cautious, perhaps they were being overcautious, but that is something for the government of India to decide what to do, whether they want to invite journalists or not. Having said that, the fact is that India's mission will now be expected to work overtime to make up for lost time In the past 1 year, as you know, that when the Islamic Emirate came, India completely shut down its embassy, and on the 17th of August last year, 2 days after, withdrew all its staff, the ambassador, other diplomats, other Indians living in the city, everybody left Kabul. And 1 year later, India is back again. So the Afghans are delighted that India is back. The spokesperson of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, a very, very suave and sophisticated gentleman called Abdul Balkhi, he, by the way, has several accents actually, part Cockney, part South African, part Australian. So I, in fact, asked him, I said, what's your accent? And he said, well, you should guess. I mean, that's a joke. But what is interesting is that he, in an interview to me, and I would urge you to watch the interview and tell me what you think, he said to me that we are very happy that the Islamic Emirate is very happy that India is back. And we want to resolve the issues, the outstanding issues between our two countries. And on top of that agenda is the issue of the Afghan students. Now, there are evidently 20,000 Afghan students studying in India even today, of which about half, I would say, are self-financing students, meaning that they're paying from their own pocket. They're not paying, the government of India is not giving them scholarships. Now, these students have not been allowed to go back and resume their classes at the university. And this is becoming actually a big wound. It's beginning to bleed, this wound. And the students I spoke to, the Afghan students I spoke to here in Kabul, urged me to pass on this message to the Indian government. So hopefully somebody's listening, to say that they would very much like to come back and resume their studies because they're losing time, losing money, and basically they don't know what to do. They say that they really, really want to come back to India. There are other examples of this. So when the Islamic Republic was in power, the Indian government paid for at least 400 to 500 Afghan children, neonates, that is newly born children with congenital heart defects. So you basically cut a check to the Afghan Red Crescent and paid for this. And these surgeries were all done in India. So that's the other part, which is that Afghans who, thousands of them would come to India for medical work. Many of them seriously ill patients. That has stopped. They're being forced to go to Pakistan because they cannot come to India. Pakistan next door, much cheaper, but they would have rather spent much more money. They used to. I know stories of Afghans selling their land, selling their jewelry to be able to make that visit from Afghanistan to India. But now those visas are completely blocked, and they are urging the Indian government to reopen that. These are some of the people-to-people measures that the Indian government had taken these past 20 years. Building schools, rebuilding health centers in all parts of Afghanistan, especially in the south and the east, in order to be able to reconnect with the people of Afghanistan. And if you look at the geopolitical rivalry, Iran, Pakistan, India, obviously the Pakistanis who have been supporting the Taliban for so many decades are in polar position, but India is not very far behind. So in my column Global Print, I've talked about the timidity of the Indian government in this return to Afghanistan. For example, an example of that would be not having Indian journalists to come and visit the embassy. We would have just liked to come and see how things were, but perhaps again the Indian diplomats wanted to be much more cautious about it. So in my column Global Print on the Print's website, I've talked a little bit about the government of India's timidity in Afghanistan, and I've said that how Indian diplomats, very special, very, very bright, very experienced people who with very little resources have actually outsmarted and outmaneuvered much larger countries with much, much larger establishments. And why shouldn't the same thing happen today? So I would urge you all to read my column Global Print on the Print's website. It's a continuing story, Afghanistan, which I am watching, which I watch very closely, which ThePrint watches very closely in all its articles and its videos. So I would urge you to read our work, to subscribe to ThePrint, pay that little sum of money, and I look forward to hearing what you have to say about this video. Thank you so much for watching.